life that can be transmitted, that strengthens us, because we're a part of all that. We're, the Foucaultians call it a genealogy, you know, our genealogy of who we are and who everything is. So anyway, this project I've been trying to promote for many years, and it's going on in a lot of places, and maybe it is here. You could hook up with it, or maybe someone's thought of it, is to make a part of the Occupy movement, because it's everywhere now. I just heard from my friend Esther Kingston-Man, who's my host here for an event tonight, and why I'm here, that where she lives in Arlington, they just started an Occupy Arlington mass. Yeah, so it's everywhere. You know, in Oklahoma there are 5 in the 2 big cities, Tulsa and Oklahoma City, but also Stillwater and Chickasha, towns you've never heard of, I'm sure, Stroud. And in the Osage Nation, Oklahoma has a huge population of Native Americans. They're very involved in it. So I think if one project could be just to drill down and open up the history and go farther than 1620, go down to when this was indigenous peoples under this crust of the earth are interred the bones, literally the bones of murdered people, subjected to genocide. And they should not be ignored because it's ugly, because that's the roots of this whole country. And we can't really deny it. You know, we can't go on denying it. Richard Slotkin, a wonderful historian at Wesleyan, wrote a trilogy of books I highly recommend, altogether about 2,000 pages, but worth it, let me tell you. The first one was called Regeneration Through Violence, in which he proposed the thesis that he was writing that during the Vietnam War, that first one, or right after the Vietnam War. Why this violence? You know, why does it seem every generation there's a war? Some of you don't even know about some of them, like the Marine occupation of Nicaragua and Haiti in the 1890s and into 1930s. Don't even know about it unless you've read Smedley Butler, who was one of the generals in Nicaragua. We say, oh, there was that little period of imperialism, and then it disappeared. And people were surprised with Iraq and Afghanistan. The U.S. is not imperialist, you know, it can't be. But you can only think that unless you have some curiosity about how a little strip of colonies hugging the East Coast, half of the East Coast of North America, went from there to the Pacific Ocean. How did that happen? Just fell from the sky? Is God willing, like the Puritans say and Ronald Reagan said? God did it. Militaries did it. This is the most militaristic country in human history. We didn't become more powerful than all militaries in human history put together by happenstance. And it started with the Indian Wars. It didn't start with the Civil War, not 1812, not the Revolutionary War. Where did George Washington get his soldier skills? He was an Indian fighter. He was a captain in the British Army, killing Indians. I mean, that's how he became general. The others were businessmen. But he was the military man. So none of this is obvious when you're studying U.S. history. Indians know this because they know they can count and they can remember through their oral history everyone who died, every tribe that was wiped out or removed or shrunken. They have this knowledge. And fortunately, I have been given that knowledge. And a lot of people support Palestine today. It's very dear to my heart. it's such a mirror image of the United States. If you look at Palestine, everything that's happened, I know many of you know that, and you take that back to the 19th century in the United States, you will find almost a duplication of the development of the reservation system in the United States, shrinking Indians down. You look at that map of Palestine today and how it's shrunken and is separated from each other, the different land bases. Looks like the reservation system. And so I think that would be a great project here, to drill down, not to try to do the whole thing, just do it here. Do it in Washington, D.C., do it in Arlington, do it in Oakland, do it in Oklahoma City, everywhere, and come out with this incredible new history that could be put together. Much better than the book I'm working on, because I can't be that detailed in 300 pages. We can have this encyclopedia of true history, and that would be a real tribute to Howard Zinn. I swear he would come back if that were possible, if he could see that. So I just want to leave you with that thought today, and thank you so much for having me here. And I would love to hear any questions or comments, and if you can't be heard and I can't hear you, do come up and talk on the microphone, or we can take this out of here. Maybe take it a little ways, huh?
Should be.
You want to do that?
Yeah, I can come.
It's kind of windy and it's hard to hear probably. You want to take it? Sure.
Questions for Roxanne?
Don't be shy.
Yeah. Maybe you could introduce yourself to me.
Hi, I'm Kathy Horsley from Berkeley, California. I'd like to ask Roxanne to tell us a little bit more about the free university system that she just mentioned briefly, something that is growing, at least in the bud stage.
Yes, and I'm trying to learn more about the free university here. We've actually started much smaller. We're calling it the Autonomous University of the Mission District, the Latino district. A lot of hipsters there too, and movement people and all. In ours, we're trying to, first of all, we're starting with the premise that everyone is an intellectual because everyone has a brain. And that some knowledge that's out there and some of us carry around and have from graduate school and all is probably not really necessary to have or necessary to transfer, but much of it is. And, or at least we can find what is, you know, what works, what will be received. We're also influenced by Ivan Illich and where I am. I don't know if you know about the period of the liberation theology and how language was a transmitter. They would bring all these Anglo-Americans down to Mexico, Cuernavaca, and teach them Spanish, but the content they were teaching was this amazing anti-imperialist content, rather than Joe and Jane went to the store, you know, or things like that, that how you usually learn language. So we get this idea of using language as a basis, but also we have a lot of, and I'm sure you do here too, day workers who are mostly Latino. And to make it a place where they can come and share their knowledge of their situation, and where others who have education all can share their knowledge and also help provide English, because it's almost impossible to get into English classes. They're so backed up, even the private firms, which are very expensive, but the junior college and all, and the programs that have language. So they say, why don't these people speak English? But, you know, they would love to. It would make their lives easier in the United States. But to also, through that, for the people doing it, to have an interchange. So this is the kind of basis of our project. It's probably a little different, but we only recently heard about the Free University in Boston, and my friend Esther is a part of it, and we want to learn more, because it doesn't mean there couldn't be many different kinds of projects.
You don't have to use my computer.
Yeah, I can sort the camera. It's okay.
I wonder if you could say a few comments about the fact that it seems that the liberation theology premise has begun to work wonders in Latin America and South America, and many of those countries have been able to take back, take back their country from the small little elites and the giant corporations that basically run the world. Could you give us a little insight on how that maybe could be applied, or begin to be applied, that kind of thinking and group thing to the United States?
Yeah, I'm getting warm taking off clothes. It's really important, you know, those of us who did, I did my doctorate in Latin American history, and so I was, right at the time I started, 64, the Vatican II was in 1962, where Pope John announced for liberation in place of missionizing people to assist people in their liberation. And their largest missions were in Africa and Latin America. And so that was such a fantastic moment for so many priests and nuns and monks who felt restricted, were often kicked out because they were assisting people rather than just signing up new members to the Catholic Church. A lot of these were native people who practiced their own, you know, their own native religions. And I could see all through my graduate school, as I was following Latin America, the transformations taking place. And it had some influence in the United States, not all that much. It had influence on Native American reservations because they really emphasized Native people. So the Catholic missions were very active in Navajo Nation, the Lakota reservations in particular, the largest Native populations in the United States. So they began assisting. So when you saw the American Indian movement and the Wounded Knee and all, there was assistance. And then the other churches followed, the Protestant churches, the World Council of Churches, the National Council of Churches in the U.S., they followed in this liberation theology. So you saw quite a change and a good leadership qualities, not interference, but listening, and then trying to get support, funding, whatever the community saw need for. So when, you know, the Sandinista Revolution, the Salvadoran Revolution, the Guatemalan revolutions in the 1970s and 80s, only Nicaragua triumphed. Later FMLN in Salvador is now in office by electoral ballot, which is just amazing. Guatemala hasn't really been able to develop a hegemony of radical politics. But all those were going on, and many of us got involved, many of us 60s veterans, and particularly those involved in Latin America, got involved. And I spent most of the 1980s in Nicaragua. And when the Contra War was going on, I did a book about that called Blood on the Border from South End, if you're interested. Native Americans were very involved in that. But their liberation theology came up. It hadn't really reached Central America. As a very conservative, old guard Catholic institutions there, especially Nicaragua. And the bishop of Nicaragua actually supported the Contras and excommunicated Ernesto Cardenal, who was in government, the Minister of Culture. So it made it very difficult for the Sandinistas going against the Catholic Church, and yet there was a tremendous support for them from, the non-Nicaraguan Catholic Church. So it was one of the main sources of the way the Contra War could be effective in destabilizing Nicaragua, and the Sandinistas got voted out in 1990. Because people were so tired of war, and there were really devout Catholics who did what the authorities told them to do, hate the Sandinistas. So liberation theology is not so well known in other circles, the general movement. But I think the spirit of that, that somehow it has, there are many sources of that, like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, out of which came the Students for a Democratic Society, out of which came the Women's Liberation Movement. And all of that goes back to the preachers, the black preachers of the 50s who were involved, were pre-liberation theology. The black church has always been a church of liberation. So that has seeped into our movement culture. So that I think, but now, it's what we've wanted, but this is the first time, I think, in my experience, like 50 years now of movement activism, that I've seen such a successful implementation of community and mutual assistance